And as soon as we pulled up with the truck and I saw the weird stuff going on out front, I was immediately like, this is a cult. This is going to get real weird real fast.
Says, make sure we take what he values most, but make sure he doesn't bleed out too quickly.
I mean, between the sort of castration shit that's been going on, you see the sickles, you see the blood. It's very heavily implied. How's it going, everybody? My name's Isaac, and this is Shane.
Hello, hello.
And welcome back to another episode of Down the Rabbit Hole, the show where we go level by level and Ready or Not, breaking down all the narratives, all the details, and all the stuff that you might miss when you're just playing the game. And in today's episode, we're going to be touching on one of my personal favorite levels. I think Shane said that this is one of his favorites too. Cherryessa Farms. This map is just absolutely bananas crazy from beginning to end. So without further ado, let's get into it.
So following the reports of an altercation outside of a store, two officers tracked down the suspects to the compound at Cherryessa Farms, where they were fired upon and subsequently went missing. Now, Cherryessa Vineyards is the home of Carried from Crisis LLC, a battered women's shelter run by ex-USIA agent Elaine Raskin. Now, if you remember from last episode, the USIA are the scary guys in the background. They're the stand-in for the CIA and just overall bad dudes. And this compound has had several weird rumors surrounding it, just from all sorts of, weird occult activity or weird, I guess you could say supernatural stuff, but I mean, let's be honest, not really. And just overall weird vibes going on at this compound. So as D Platoon, we are sent in to go investigate and retrieve those missing officers.
Right. And you talk about how all these rumors and all this sort of creepy, weird stuff has been going on. And I find this really interesting as a map because it's one of the scariest levels that I've gone through, but it's also in the middle of the day. So it's kind of this sort of weird, it's got like this midsummer vibe to it. If you guys have ever seen that movie, this very kind of strange, something horrible is happening here. But it's kind of under the facade of this nice vineyard out in the country. Whatever could go wrong here? Anyways, though, when we arrive to the scene, we can find that crashed police cruiser of those two officers that Shane mentioned a second ago. And it seems that as they were shot at, the officers crashed into this fence. But now, these police officers are nowhere to be found. As we work our way closer to this building, we can see that on the outside of the vineyards, there's all of these sort of weird Greek statues and these sort of like flower arrangements resembling people. It's really strange. It feels super out of place for, Los Sueños, but it's really creepy at the same time. And noticeably, all of these figures appear feminine. We can also see this sort of female logo on the side of the building, but it has these sort of alterations that have been made to it, but we'll discuss the context of that a little bit later.
And before we move further, I kind of want to back up a bit and talk about those flower statues. Because when I first played this map and I saw those weird flower arrangements in the shape of people, I immediately went to the movie Annihilation, which has a very similar looking flower person. And the fact that you mentioned Midsummer before, this map has a lot of very subtle, famous movie references. I don't know if you caught that, but there's, as we'll see later in the map, the maypole, which is again very Midsummer, the weird statue things, and just in general, I want to say a Children of the Corn vibe kind of thing, or just any kind of cultish horror movie going on. That's what this, I really like that feeling, especially because you said before, it's totally during the day. It shouldn't be scary, but it's pretty creepy, especially as the things we'll later discover. But just before we even get to that point, it's already giving us this weird feeling. Just the walk up to the front door, it's okay, well, something's not going right here. Something is off.
I think more so than any of the other levels that I'd played in Ready or Not, this one really kind of hits you over the head with that aesthetic. I don't know if this was the same way for you when you first played it, but I didn't know what was really going on in this mission. And as soon as we pulled up with the truck and I saw the weird stuff going on out front, I was immediately like, this is a cult. This is going to get real weird real fast. And I think they really nailed that vibe of, like you said, this creepy Children of the Corn cult people. It's just really strange thing. So
yeah.
Anyways, upon entering the building, we'll start to see these cult members, some of which are armed and some of which are wearing these really creepy sort of Greek theater masks. We can also see that a lot of these women seem to have burns and other disfigurements, which were likely suffered from the hands of their abusers, because remember, this was supposed to be a battered women's shelter. So this main entry room that we walk into also has all of these weird little symbols dangling from the ceiling. It's the same sort of logo that we saw on the wall outside. We could also see several paintings and decorations falling in line with that sort of Greek symbolism. Maneuvering our way through this building, we can also stumble upon what appears to be a conspiracy room. If we didn't get enough of that in the last episode, we're going to get a lot more today.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. That's my favorite thing when I play this game. And it's like, I'm like, okay, it's a brand new map. Let's check things out. And the first thing I find is a conspiracy board. I'm just like, yes, let's get it. Let's get into this shit.
I feel like half of this podcast has been like us going way too hard on bulletin boards. Yeah. Like you had the first one in the first mission, you had the last one in the last episode, and now you've got this one. Although in this episode, instead of taking aim at the USIA, this board seems to be taking target at the male abusers of the women of this cult.
So on this board are various men, all of which who have been accused of various heinous acts, all towards women. Don't think we need to specify what they did. You can assume what they did. Just imagine the worst possible thing, and they probably did it. And what we learn here is that these women are specifically targeting them. It's pretty obvious that these women are looking to kidnap these men and repay the pain and then some that they had suffered. In fact, I believe one of the people on the board says, make sure we take what he values most, but make sure he doesn't bleed out too quickly, which really, you get an idea of how these people are mentally.
I hate to interrupt you. Yeah.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. You mentioned that character on the board, Big Dick Rick is the dude's name. And this is kind of like my Pepe Sylvia moment of this podcast, because I saw that name and it's a name you can't forget.
Nope. Ladies and gentlemen.
And if you actually go back through some of the previous missions up to this point, you see that name pop up a lot. In the streamer mission, you can see his name pop up on the sort of live stream chat. In the Neon Nightclub mission, you can see his phone number pinned to the wall. And as we find out here, he actually frequented that nightclub and roofied and kidnapped women. So they have a very good reason for wanting to kidnap this guy, and I just thought it was kind of cool that you could see evidence of his crimes up to this point. That's really cool game design. I think it's super tiny, little small detail that a lot of people probably won't notice when they first play the game. But when I first came about that, I thought that was super neat that they actually made this side character for this random name on the board. I thought that was kind of neat.
Yeah. Nah, man, take a shot every time Void has really good environmental storytelling. Like, goddamn, it's great.
You won't make it through the episode.
Nope. But as we look around more on this map, we can find more newspapers and notes, all of which are mentioning the rise in child abduction and sex crimes across the city, which, again, we've already talked about how horrible Los Sueños is, but if you thought it was bad, now it's a lot worse, and it's not getting any better. And as we move over to the next room, we can also find I assume it's Eve Nader, who is another one of the suspects on site. It's her painting room. And so Eve is Elaine Raskin's second in command, and we don't really know much about her. I don't believe she's USIA affiliated, but we do know she was battered and beaten and all sorts of things. But then Elaine manipulated her into believing whatever this cult believes in.
And we'll sort of find out more about this manipulation that Elaine performs once we make it to her bedroom. At the opposite side of the building, that's where we find Elaine's quarters. And inside, there is a painting of Medusa, some very creepy decorations, as well as several severed human fingers. Now, here we can sort of immediately get a better picture of what this cult is doing. If the guns and the creepy masks and all of this weird shit didn't immediately tell you, now you know that they're a very violent cult. Severed human fingers just don't wind up on your dresser. It's not a thing that usually happens. But anyways,
I would hope so.
I would hope so too. But anyways, it's also worth mentioning here that throughout the entire property, there has been several subtle references to castration. We can see this in paintings, and as we continue to go along, we find that this is just a much more sinister operation than just a battered women's shelter. This is bad. This is a bad place. I'm so sorry if I'm hitting you over the head with this, but by the end of this episode, it's going to get kind of grisly, and I just feel the need right now to warn you that the cult is bad. It gets bad. It gets really bad.
Real bad. It's bad. Real bad.
Anyways, though, in this bedroom, we can find 2 tape recorders, one of which mentions Crazy Gerard from our last mission, but the other one is far more interesting to me. In it, Elaine is essentially writing a speech about why her followers should sacrifice men to their god. But it's quite evident in her speaking here that Elaine doesn't believe in any of this. She's simply using this as a means of manipulation to keep these people under her under control. Which leads to a whole slew of questions. Why is Elaine manipulating these people? Why does she want a cult of women following her in the first place? We don't know now, but hopefully by the end of the level, we'll be able to find some answers to all of those questions.
So the other recording we will save for later for obvious reasons, but let's just move on to explain the rest of the property. As we step back out, we can see that it's, again, very off. There's more statues, there's more of those flower statue things, there's a greenhouse, a very creepy wine cellar, a small barracks, just everything about this, it's less of a farmhouse and more of like a cultish compound. As we move through the courtyard and towards the back of the property, we will actually stumble upon a very dilapidated old church. And again, like we've been talking about these different movie references, this is very True Detective-like. If you've seen the first season of that show, I got very similar vibes to this. I think there are a lot of really cool references on this map. But inside this church, we will find that it was built around a massive tree, and on this tree, they carved a shrine to their goddess, whomever she may be. And as we go downstairs, things start to go a bit more sideways. We will find that in the basement of this church, it has been converted into a torture chamber. We can find sickles, chains, cages, and all sorts of other bad stuff. And at the base of this tree, we can find that its roots are bloody, almost like the cultists are sacrificing blood to their god. And at this point, you may be wondering, okay, where are those officers? Well, if you walk back outside, we can actually find 4 freshly dug graves. And I believe the implication here is that 2 of those graves are the officers, and the other ones are likely men that the cult has killed, which again opens up further questions about how many bodies are buried around this compound.
The church is really the point, for me anyway, where things got awful. You know, Elaine's room was bad, but once you start seeing the state of that basement in the church, it is bad vibes central. Seeing that the police officers just sort of kind of stumbled upon that, and if they had to suffer through that just for sort of doing their job, that's awful. I hate that for them, especially the male officer, because it seems like the women here are operating with a very sort of high discrimination towards men.
Yeah,
quite frankly.
I think that's an understatement.
I mean, between the sort of castration shit that's been going on, you see the sickles, you see the blood. It's very heavily implied if you guys haven't gathered that, that the men kidnapped are being, castrated. I think, like you said, that conspiracy board, didn't it say like, we're going to take what he values most or something crazy like that?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a bad time. If you're a male listener, you're probably cringing up as you're hearing this stuff. But it's kind of interesting, right? Because with cults, you don't see this behavior, right? You don't see this super violent, assaulting men in particular. That's not really the MO that you typically see. So Shane and I actually had two different sort of theories as to why the cult is doing this, as to what they actually believe in. And Shane, take it away, because I'm really interested on hearing your theory of what was really happening here, what this sort of religion or cult was based around.
Now, Isaac, as you may know, I am a theater kid. I studied theater in college, and I am a worshiper, a thespian, a worshiper of Dionysius, the god of wine and theater. That's my guy, and I studied him a lot in college. And I looked at this cult, and it gave me a lot of Dionysian cult aspects. So again, the Greek god, again, we'll back up a little bit further. All throughout this map, there's tons of Greek symbology of all kinds. And again, Dionysus, the god of wine, fertility, theater, and more importantly, ritual, ecstasy, and madness. So the worshippers of Dionysus were just crazy. They would drink wine, dance, music, all sorts of things. And specifically, the Dionysian cultists had female followers called Maenads, which were known as the Raving Ones. And they are frenzied women in a sort of trance. And there's also a myth that these Maenads could literally tear men apart with their bare hands in service to Dionysus. And I kind of interpreted this map, again, it's on a vineyard, lots of wine, women tearing men apart, literally. I took this as Raskin became a Dionysus-like figure. She instigated this ritual madness in her followers, not just ordering violence, but making them revel in it. Because again, we saw before, they said take what matters to him most, but let him suffer. They enjoyed the suffering. And like Dionysus, she uses intoxicating beliefs and ecstatic frenzy to override moral hesitation. Because again, these women, they don't really have any, at least from what we can tell, there's not a lot of hesitation in these acts. And so the way I interpret this, because again, we don't actually know the name of this goddess that they're worshiping. And I don't really think there needs to be a name for her. I don't think that's the point. I think the point is to inspire this, again, ritualistic madness, this Dionysian-like death cult in her followers. And the way she did it was by manipulating these battered women into killing their former abusers, which again, that would probably lure a lot of people into her cause. You invite them in with lots of love and care, and then okay, you want to be part of our cult? We're going to probably get you, I imagine there's a lot of drug use, imagine a lot of alcohol use, get you in an intoxicated state to just go frenzy, to go tear these people apart in the name of this quote unquote goddess. And this really, again, called back to this Dionysian-like cult. Because again, I don't know if you've studied Dionysus or any of the whole concept of a theater before, how it started acting and all that stuff. Shit was crazy, man. It is insane. Just the very early stages of theater and again, Dionysian crazed frenzies. It's insane. It's a really fascinating read, but that's my interpretation of this map.
Okay, so my interpretation was much more founded on 10 minutes of Google searches. It had nothing to do with my formal education. I was not a student under any, Greek theater or anything like that. But my personal theory was that the cult was actually sort of worshiping Medusa. As everybody knows, the story of Medusa, right? Greek mythology, very sort of similar style here. And the reason I believe that is in my 10 minutes of research, Medusa was actually assaulted by some of the other Greek gods. And, you know, I'm very much speaking out of turn here. I'm just remembering what I'm remembering. But, you know, I think it very well could be a possibility that Elaine sort of welcomed these women in and told them that story and said, hey, you're not too unalike from Medusa. You know, you too suffered abuse. You too suffered assault and all these different things. And, you know, seeing the imagery of Medusa, you see it in some of the paintings, you see it in some of the stonemasonry on some of the buildings. It leads me to believe that Medusa might play a bigger part in the cult, but at the same time, it very well could just be sort of set dressing. Elaine could be using multiple different sort of Greek sources for this cult. I'm not 100% sure. And I think that sort of mystery there is part of what makes it so interesting to me, right? Because I go in and I try to piece stuff together in it, right? Seeing the Medusa, and then you see all the weird castration pictures and shit, and you're like, what's going on? And I think that's kind of part of the fun, is you're trying to piece that story together. And that kind of leads me to an interesting theory that maybe even Elaine was just sort of like, you know, all of this was for some other reason for her. You know, as that tape suggested, she didn't really believe any of the stuff that she was preaching to these people. So she very well could have just sat there and done the same Google search, right? Where it's like, oh shit, we'll get some Medusa, we'll get some Dionysius, or however you said his name in there. And she just sort of piecemealed this sort of cult after, or this theology, whatever you want to call it. The fact of the matter is, though, that she took advantage of these people, right? That she took these women that were very obviously battered. You know, like I said, the burns on the face, the scars on the face, all of these, you know, horribly abused women, and she used them to further her own gains. But that leads us to the question, what was she trying to achieve with this group?
Yeah, you don't really know what she's trying to accomplish, but from an outside perspective, it almost looks like she's trying to brainwash people, trying to do some mind control. Now, remind me, we've talked about this before. We've discussed some interesting, you know, LSD experiments, MK Ultra. It's like they're trying to practice manipulation, and it's like, well, what do you know? Raskin is ex-USIA, which leads us into one of the craziest reveals of this. Honestly, I would say one of the craziest reveals of the game, to be honest.
100%. Yes, most definitely. Like, when I first came upon this, dude, I had to stop playing the game for a little bit to just like process the story, right?
So when we look at the associated evidence with this map, the first two bits are just photos of missing people or just FOIA docs linked to Eve Nader. However, the most important piece of info is classified USIA communication transcript between Raskin and another agent named Brody. Now, here's where things get crazy. In this communication, Raskin and Brody are going back and forth about someone called Gamma 1. Now, this individual has been planted in a leadership position at a department of some sorts, probably a police department, and that this individual will be experiencing very dangerous situations, and they will be monitored very closely by the USIA. Now, when you turn the paper over, it turns out that this individual, Gamma 1, is in fact David Judge Beaumont, our player character.
It turns out that we are the ones that are being monitored by the USIA. And it seems that a lot of our experiences in Los Sueños have actually been watched by this shadowy organization. And, you know, Shane, if we go back to that last episode, if you guys can remember, there was all that tapes and all that weird stuff that Gerard was saying. He was saying that we were part of the cycle, that we were just like him, another cog in this awful machine. And as it turns out, we're actually another experiment of the USIA, which is just like mind-boggling.
Exactly. So going back a little bit to the 2 recordings Raskin had in her room, one of the recordings, she mentions receiving a out-of-date coded message who she believes was sent to her from Gerard. And this message says that he's warning her that she's being watched and that they have been trying to find other members and that the cohorts have been established, or there's more work to do and all this stuff. And Raskin also mentions that something about a group striking a dam. Now, this is a very blink and you'll miss it moment, but in the very first map we covered at the gas station, there is a newspaper that says derelict dam sees, I believe it's like 4th year of misuse or no one's taking care of this dam because it was attacked.
Right.
So now we know that a group struck the dam, it's in misuse now, and there's something about a cohort, which again, on this map, on the 4U gas station, there is also a reference to the first cohort, something about the first cohort controlling your life. And in this detail, there's something about a cohort, so maybe the cohort is the identification of these sleeper cells, which also might tie into Project Mariposa, which she also mentions, which is the MLO. It just, everything is connecting and it's crazy.
It is crazy. And, you know, I think it was last episode that we proposed the theory of, hey, maybe the USIA is watching us, and maybe some of these things that we're going through are checkpoints, you know. And if you guys remember from our last episode, we sort of proposed the theory that perhaps the USIA is using these events partaken in Los Sueños as sort of checkpoints for the MLO, right? And now that we are confirmed to be a member of that, or at least another USIA experiment, I feel like that theory sort of gets confirmed. They're obviously keeping an eye on us. They're watching us go through all of these different horrific events. Where do you think it goes from here, Shane?
So the way I'm interpreting this story is that this is a branching timeline. Obviously, we've discussed this in the first episode that the timeline of this universe doesn't exactly coincide with our own. In fact, there's, 5 extra presidents or something like that?
Right, yes.
So the way I imagine this story is that the USIA figured out a way to actually make Project MKUltra work. Again, as we mentioned before, that's a brainwashing real-world thing that the CIA tried to accomplish, and it failed, allegedly. And so in this world, I imagine what the idea is the USIA figured out how to actually perfect this mind control. And so what they did was they established the first cohort, which are these sleeper agents, Manchurian candidates, if you will. And they established these people and placed them in all sorts of positions of power. In fact, I believe last episode, I theorized that Senator Fremont, who was almost assassinated, potentially could have been one of these sleeper agents. Because again, if you have somebody in a position of power that is manipulatable and you can control them, then that would be a perfect spot. So what the first cohort allegedly are doing is brainwashing all these people, putting them in positions of power. Now, the mentioning of the group that struck the dam and the MLO, I believe that members of the first cohort who, I guess for lack of a better word, wake up, who realize what happened,
right?
They are the ones who established the MLO. Maybe. They're the ones who are like, oh shit, the government was trying to brainwash me, trying to force me to do this. And then the MLO are those who are like, hey, no, we're here, we're awake, let's figure this out. That leads into the quote that the MLO are the child of the USIA. Now, what the MLO are trying to do, are they trying to further experiments, trying to, recontextualize the brainwashing experiments? We don't know. But what we do know is that Judge is one of these sleeper agents. He was placed in a position of power within the LSPD. He is in charge of D Platoon. He is highly trained, and he is participating in these high-risk situations. Also, these situations are I would say they are very, very high risk. It's not your standard drug bust.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And that also implies that maybe Judge has had further training. Maybe this brainwashing also involves, further military training or beyond military training, if you will. And I think that they mentioned that the point of these LSD experiments was to create these incorruptible officers. So now you have these, I guess for lack of a better term, like these programmable officers who are highly trained. Like, oh my God, that's a recipe for disaster, especially when there is a highly corrupt organization holding the reins.
Of course, man. And, I just want to go back to a point that you just mentioned, saying that, wow, a lot of the stuff that Judge goes through is pretty insane. And especially in some of the DLCs, right? You look at him raiding this oil rig and, these cruise ship, or not cruise ships, but like massive yachts and stuff. And you're like, that seems a bit out of scope for a regular SWAT team. But then you throw in the context that he is this USIA sleeper agent, and suddenly that starts to make a lot more sense as to why he's there.
Oh, yeah.
But with all of this sort of craziness, we have to bring it back to the theme of this episode. What was Elaine's end goal with this cult? Why did she have all this stuff going on with the USIA? Was she still working with them, or was she actively working against them? Because if we're a sort of extension of the USIA, we're going after Elaine. What's happening? Shane, please tell me what's happening.
Well, as you know, I have all the answers.
Right, yeah.
Thing is, I don't know, because it said in the beginning that Elaine is an ex-USIA operative, so she no longer works with the organization. However, maybe that's not entirely true, because we've talked a lot about movies this episode, references and stuff like that, and maybe because I just watched this movie, it's on my brain, but I just rewatched The Departed. I don't know if you've seen that before.
I've not.
But the premise is DiCaprio goes undercover with a mob, and while he's undercover, they erase the fact that he works for the police department. So if you look it up, it says, oh yeah, he's a dropout. He never actually made it in the department. So maybe Elaine is in a similar situation. Like, she technically is still within the USIA, but she's undercover. So what they did was basically, let's say, like, yeah, she retired or she was fired, and made it seem like she's not affiliated any longer. And then they put her in this position to attempt new ways of mind control, maybe a new substance of some kind. Because it said before that they were testing with LSD-based mind manipulation. So potentially the new thing that Elaine is doing, if she is still involved with the USIA, is they could have given her a new substance to dose these women with. So we said before, again, if my theory of the Dionysian death cult Maenad frenzy stuff is true, the reason why they're so embedded and believe in this goddess in this blood cult is because she's dosing them with some new type of mind control substance. And if that's true, then that means Elaine is still very much part of the USIA. But I don't know. What's your interpretation?
I have sort of a little bit of a different theory, right? Because as you know, in that last episode that we talked about the USIA, it's very clear that they're willing to kill people or disappear people in order to keep this sort of program covered up. They don't want facts and news about the MLO getting out to the public, right? And Elaine was notoriously sort of part of this program. She oversaw adjacent sort of departments. She was involved in this experiment. And once she got discharged, my theory is that she knew that she would be next. Elaine worked within the USIA, so she knows how they operate, and maybe she knew that the only way she'd be able to survive a run-in with them would be if she cultivated a massive cult of people to help protect her. And what easier way to get that cult than to sort of shape the minds using the techniques that you learned within that department. Maybe she saw these battered women as easy victims, as people that she could sort of champion to be her glorified bodyguards. I don't know. But the fact of the matter is the USIA has been using us, whether inadvertently or not, to help cover up this story. I mean, we were the people that went in and got Gerard. We are the people that have now gone in and captured Elaine, right? So it's pretty evident to me that we are being used still. And maybe Elaine sort of saw that coming, and that was her reason for making the cult. She needed protection, and these were the easiest people to get to help her. I'm not sure.
It's complicated.
It's super complicated. But even with this, even with us finding out that there's all these ties to the USIA, that all of this crazy pandemonium's going on behind the scenes, this story isn't over. And as it turns out, this isn't going to be our last run-in with the USIA either. But it is the end of our episode today. I feel like Shane and I have yapped way too long. We hope that you've walked away with something, because this storyline gets super convoluted, super complicated, and it's just a web of conspiracies, isn't it, Shane?
Mm-hmm.
But as I said, that just about sums it up for us today. If you're interested in following us on other platforms, you can find me on Instagram at @TheIsaacMorgan, or on YouTube at Isaac Morgan.
And you can follow me on Instagram at Shane the Doyle, and on YouTube at Shane, followed by a self-deprecating title. You'll probably find one of my many channels.
But as always, thank you guys so much for tuning in today.
And remember, don't start a cult.
Good night, everybody.